This year is the first time in my life that I actually played all the games nominated for Game of the Year at the Game Awards. Probably because half of them were indie games that weren't full-price AAA titles. But anyways, in playing them and reflecting, I found an interesting correlation or relationship or something of the sorts between pairs of the game, so I'd like to share those thoughts here and talk specifically about where the games thrive and some critiques too. So here's the duality I've found between these nominees for Game of the Year. And one of these is a very easy but very addicting gameplay with colorful art, and the other is a very difficult platformer Metroidvania kind of game but with very dark art. Yeah, these two are definitely two sides of the same coin, and I just found it very entertaining to especially play one after the other. Now, when Donkey Kong Bananza was coming out, it was a huge surprise for me. Like, I wasn't even really planning on getting it originally, and I was planning on only getting the game if it had pretty much overwhelmingly positive reviews and positive word of mouth that I've heard of it, and well, that's what it had when it came out, and I was extremely happy with that purchase. For me, like I said, it had very addicting gameplay, and honestly, that whole concept of like tearing the world apart, like when seeing it, it didn't really hook me when just seeing like the trailers and previews for it, but playing it and in practice, it actually is very addictive. Now, Silksong, I didn't play the first Hollow Knight, but I've had it in my backlog, and I've heard nothing but great things about it. So Silksong I knew was of course going to be a great game when it came out. I was definitely leaning a lot more toward getting it before it came out, at the least bit for its price point, which is kind of ironic because another difference with these is that Donkey Kong feels like it was one of the games that helped pioneer the higher priced games, even though it wasn't the first $70 game and it wasn't $80 like Mario Kart World. But then you have Silksong, which was probably, I think, the cheapest game of the games that are nominated for Game of the Year. Now, both games are addicting and both represent two different sides of immense exploration in the platformer game genre. But Donkey Kong kept me playing due to its unique mechanics and its world exploration and endless reward system that feels good on like a subconscious level. I don't know, there's just something about getting the gold as you're tearing apart the world and finding different treasures in the fossils and all that stuff that it just feels very rewarding. But Silksong offered more of a reward system and exploring the mysteries and artistic beauty of its world in a more conscious kind of way. Like, there's so many times when playing Silksong that when I would get to like a new area, I honestly just have to stop and just pause and either look at the scenery and the environment that is handcrafted there and or listen to the music. These games both offer great experiences and definitely deserve to be considered for a Game of the Year, but I definitely feel that Donkey Kong is definitely more of a perfect family kind of game to play, especially in terms of like having it be something that, you know, parents can introduce their kids to or whatnot, and just be a good entry point into gaming in general for their kids. It makes me think of how kids have a tendency to make noise and be destructive and loud, and I feel that Donkey Kong Bananza would be a perfect way for them to kind of tap into that urge, but in a way that doesn't actually destroy anything in their environments or, well, their parents' home. Silksong, on the other hand, is a perfect game for finding inspiration in its artistic design and vibe. Continuing with the theme of family, I feel Silksong is a perfect game for someone to show their kids as they get older. Like how a lot of kids as they get into their teenage years, may go through phases of, being into darker things or whatnot. That'd be a perfect time to show them Silksong, as that definitely fits that vibe a lot more and definitely has a lot more of the darker kind of tongue-in-cheek kind of vibe to everything. And of course with the difficulty difference, as you start them off with Donkey Kong Bananza, and as they play more games and get better at playing games, then they could take on Silksong later on as a new challenge. But with that, I definitely feel that Silksong should be the winner for the best art design, because for me personally, it really is a wonder to behold. And it makes me more than ever want to go back and play the first Hollow Knight and experience everything in that. One thing that's an interesting difference between these games is how the dialogue is experienced. In Hades 2, the dialogue is kind of done in a more classic way where you do have the voice acting with it, but you click through it as the dialogue flows between the characters. But with Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, the dialogue is all voice acted similar to that of like an Elder Scrolls game, but when it goes between characters reacting to each other and speaking to each other, sometimes it could be a little jarring and kind of like cut too quickly. And to me, it's interesting because I feel that when it does too quick of those cuts, that kind of like takes away from some of the vibe that you're feeling in those conversations. Whereas in Hades 2, where even though you have to press the button there to go to the next character responding to what they just heard, the vibe is still intact. It doesn't feel as jarring to me, even if you're taking like a second or even a minute to go to the next character's response and the current dialogue going on. Hades is more combat driven and offers arguably my favorite combat mechanics of any game that I've played this year, whereas Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 advises to avoid combat kind of in a way, or at least it advises it because of the choice making and morality that's presented in the game of like, you know, you don't always have to resort to combat, and especially if you are fighting someone, if they yield, let them yield. But to me it's kind of funny because it's like they are kind of steering you away from doing too much combat in the game. At least that's how it felt to me playing through the beginning of the game, and it feels like it's like that's their way of trying to have you avoid the jankiness that I felt with it. Of course, from things I've seen online, not everyone agrees that it's janky, but it does feel like quite a few people do, and I understand it because the combat from what I've read is done the way it is to mimic like actual technique for combat for back then. But when I get to quests where there's like multiple people fighting, and especially when there's the quest where I'm fighting like multiple wolves, I feel like I'm dying more in those encounters than what I do in Souls games. And like the thing that's like helped me like push on is generally there's an autosave that happens pretty soon before the encounter, so it's easy to just jump back into it and just keep trying it over and over again. But it's really difficult playing through the combat there, and it doesn't feel like it's the kind of way of like overwhelming on purpose like Silent Hill, but just more of like, it's like I'm pressing the attack button, why can I not attack? And maybe that's just because like I've played Elder Scrolls games, I played Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim, and it's funny is the combat in those were known for being janky, but honestly those feel a lot smoother than Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. But the great thing with playing Hades 2 in the same time as this is that, yeah, if I get too tired of Kingdom Come, then I would just, you know, go to Hades 2 and, you know, enjoy the combat in that, because at least the combat in Hades 2, like I feel that if I die with that, it's just a lesson to learn from, and it doesn't feel like it's a overwhelming control scheme that is hindering me. And with that, each of these games offer what I wish the other one did. And what I mean by that is I mean that I wish that Hades had more to its story and kind of just more that you can do, but I understand it's, you know, a roguelike, so it just has that one solitary run that you're doing, which there are plenty of different things that can happen on the run and different things that can evolve with that. But it's one thing for me, especially after getting through the first boss and having multiple areas that you go through on a run. Once I lose that run, I'm not as compelled to start a new run right away, so it almost makes Hades kind of turn into a game kind of like Animal Crossing in a sense, where it's like, yeah, I'll play it maybe a little bit each day, but it's still fun. Each day I do go back being like, okay, let's try another run today, let's see how far I can get. But with Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, like I was saying with the combat, God, I really wish I had a better combat system. I really wish it was more fluid, because when fighting other enemies, I really feel like the enemies I fight, they have a very fluid combat system. I feel like they're able to hit, if I'm fighting someone one-on-one, they're able to hit one after another, whereas when I'm hitting the attack, it's like he can only do one attack, and then I have to wait like 5 to 10 seconds to attack again. And then I swear there's even been times where I would attack, but if an enemy happens to be attacking, that Henry just stops mid-attack. Like, it's not like the enemy interrupts my attack, but rather Henry starts attacking, and then it's like the game's like, oh no, the enemy's attacking now. And it's like, what is this?
Yanking my noble pizzle.
But I would say the side stuff that I've done in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is very interesting. Like how with doing alchemy, instead of just, you know, selecting things in a menu, selecting ingredients to make potions, like you actually have steps that you do at an alchemy table, which is really interesting. And the blacksmithing to me is it's a very interesting kind of like grind, because it does take a little bit of time to do it, but it does make me appreciate more when I make like a new weapon or even a horseshoe. You know, the horseshoe felt a little more annoying to make, but especially when making the swords and the axes that I've done so far, like, yeah, it feels a little more rewarding, and it's kind of interesting. It's like next level of being that game where it's like, you know, you're doing like work and stuff that would be work in like real life and putting it into a game, but making it kind of fun. And I think what's fun about it is because it's the stuff that you wouldn't go and do this in real life necessarily. Like, people wouldn't necessarily just start blacksmithing in real life. So it's fun to just have where you could just do it in the game. And honestly, it makes me want to explore the game more, to like just see what more there is that you can do like that. It's really interesting and funny for me that what drives me is trying to see how much I can do that doesn't turn into combat. Like, how much of the different things I can do that involves, living the life of this guy, from the Middle Ages, and just, build reputation and whatnot. But for me, neither of these games are the top of the top games of the year for this year, but I do feel like they're definitely the top for their respective genres. Hades 2, for me, when it comes to just pure action games, it is definitely the best action games. It's the funnest action in the games that I've played this year. Like, can't recommend it enough, especially for people who like the, ARPG kind of stuff, the hack and slash kind of stuff. And when it comes to Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, I know it's got quite a bit of competition, especially since it's competing in the RPG category against Clair Obscur, which Clair Obscur is a great experience, a great game altogether. But to me, when it comes to breaking down RPG, like role-playing game, you're playing a role. The whole point of what separates that from like action adventure or whatnot is the idea of taking on a different role. I feel that Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 really is like the best RPG game, because what it does that's so unique is it allows you to take this role in this completely different world, like to the fullest extreme, it feels like. And I don't know, it's just very, very interesting the way it's done, where it's not just about getting through a story and like the action and stuff, but the steps that you take to get there, you have more that you're doing. You're not just clicking on like a quick action thing to say like, oh, make this sword or make this potion, to give examples of the things I've done so far in the game. But you're actually doing it. With the blacksmithing, you actually like heat up the metal, and then you actually like have to pound it, and you have to pound it evenly with the hammer and whatnot, and like you have to turn it over, and then you heat it up again and temper it and all that, and like you actually do that. Or like to the point with like the alchemy, for example, it's like you turn up like a heater, and then you have some ingredients that you're using so far in a pot, and then you put the pot on the heater and you let it boil, and then you have to turn over this specific hourglass and wait for its time to run completely out, and perfectly right when it runs out, take it off the boil and then put in the other ingredient. And it's just really interesting. And to me, like going that in depth of like really embodying like role playing, it really takes the role playing aspect to the next level. And so that's why I really feel like Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is definitely the best role playing game that's come out this year. AAA game that vibes like an indie game, and an indie game that vibes like a AAA game. That's how I've always felt about Death Stranding. With the first one and with the second one, it's Hideo Kojima, but with the backing of Sony Interactive Entertainment. So those games are definitely AAA games, but because of how unique and niche they are, to me, they very much vibe like they're like indie games, like very, very well-funded indie games. And that's one of the things that's very interesting and kind of brings a little bit of their charm. But of course, as plenty of people have said about Clair Obscur, is this game that's made by, 30 people, but at the same time I hear it's made by more than 30 people, and that's not true. But nonetheless, it's very much an indie game, but its ambition and what it pulls off is done in such a massive scale that it feels like a AAA game. So that's a very interesting contradiction between those two that I feel. There's another thing that is definitely part of the discourse, especially with Clair Obscur, is about how great the music is, which it is. But for me, Death Stranding 2 has a great soundtrack, not just in its original music, but especially in the collaboration of all the indie artists that have been put together for the soundtrack that you hear as you play through the main story of the game. Both explore the concept of grief in different ways, but Death Stranding 2 is more realistic in the path of its exploration, with the only scene Kier being choosing to carry on with day to day, but giving a more Hollywood big screen kind of ending. But Clair Obscur is exploring the concept of getting lost in grief and concluding with endings that give more of an indie film vibe, more of a bittersweet in the choices to be made. I don't really want to go into spoilers with these, but it to me is a very interesting way in how these two have kind of a different approach to its conclusion about each of their explorations of grief. The character development and overall story is much better in Expedition 33, but for me personally, the grind in Death Stranding 2 made it a lot easier to get lost in it. Expedition 33 became honestly kind of too same for me. By the end of the game, it just felt like it was just kind of a rinse and repeat of doing the same attacks and always making sure that you're spot on with parrying and everything, which it is a fun mechanic, don't get me wrong, but when you're getting to the final bosses of the game, at least in the main story, it just felt too much of the same. And I don't know if maybe there was something else I was supposed to find in the exploring stuff that wasn't part of the main path that would have changed that. And of course, I did see that, there are some bosses that you'll encounter that aren't part of the main path that are even more powerful and even stronger. And I couldn't even imagine going back and fighting them because of, how much more of a grind it is to just inch away at their health and just constantly be perfect at parrying. So while Expedition 33 gameplay became too same for me by the end, Death Stranding 2 actually kind of creates new mechanics. Now what I'm talking about is a thing that, from what I remember, was done in the first game, but I feel that it was done better in the second one, where the final boss fight actually turns more into like a fighting game and completely gets away from how the action was throughout the entire game. And so to me, it keeps it fresh and it makes it very, very entertaining, as opposed to just having it be what you've already been doing, but you just do a lot more because now you have a boss that has exponentially more health than the enemies that you've been encountering so far. Upon initial playing, Death Stranding 2 was my favorite game that I had the most fun playing, but Clair Obscur is the one that I think about the most when reflecting on its story. But I do feel a connection to Death Stranding 2 when driving and listening to the playlist I made, which basically replicates the playlist that I listened to of the music in the game itself when making deliveries. This brings into the debate of what is more important, something that felt good in the moment or something that feels better over time. A lot of my favorite music is actually stuff that when I first heard it, I was not sure how I felt about it, but over time it grew on me. Now, to Expedition 33's credit, it was very fun to play in the moment, but Death Stranding 2 was the kind of game that I would play every waking moment when life's responsibilities were giving me a break. I also wonder if my feelings for Expedition 33 have also compounded and been influenced from all the content and theory crafting and exploration I've seen in my algorithm since playing the game, as opposed to rarely really seeing anything posted about Death Stranding 2. I feel like that has had an effect. Like I said, I normally have more of a liking for things that are thought-provoking, that keep me thinking about them over time, but the emotions I felt while playing Death Stranding 2 were definitely the strongest I felt while playing a game this year. And when it comes to these cinematic video game masterpieces, Death Stranding 2 is closer to how I prefer movies. Something I feel deeply in the moment and continues to resonate with me, especially when I hear its music over time. But I would say though that still Clair Obscur is one that I still think about more. And speaking of the music, both soundtracks are great, like I said before, but I feel that most of Expedition 33's soundtrack has its strength mostly in a handful of songs, like the extremely catchy Lumiere, or the tragic masterpiece Alicia, and the vengeful theme of Gustave. Even though, when hearing this the first time, I immediately was taken out of the game and just thought about Silent Hill 2 due to its similar melody and rhythm to the promised reprise. But Expedition 33 also had many others that really build the world and immerse you in it completely. But the songs Woodkid has made for Death Stranding 2 bring in different levels of immersion, with the most impactful being in the cutscenes. To the Wilder in all of its different versions, Minus 61, Story of Rainy, Tomorrow, and Fragile Things are the main songs that come to mind, but the style of hearing songs from the collaborative soundtrack of the different indie artists create this unique vibe these games strive for, as these are songs that you hear upon discovering new parts of the game world and working so well with its scenery. And from these artists, I found who's become my new favorite artist I listen to in general. Magnolian honestly has no skips in his discography. Granted, he's only started with an EP and an album, as well as he has a single that he made for the game that released the day after the game came out. But I'm very excited to see where he goes from here. I'd say regardless of how you feel about Death Stranding 2, I highly recommend checking out his music. I'll include a link in the description. To be honest though, I was skeptical when first hearing his song Indigo when used in the trailer at the Game Awards a couple years ago, as it was kind of hard to not hear Low Roar when showing off a new Death Stranding game, but Magnolian is a perfect pick. His music does have a similar vibe to Low Roar's in that they both kind of have that like flavoring of folk music, but It's different though, whereas Low Roars is more of like a futuristic synth-driven kind of folk music, and Magnolian is like more like a contemporary indie rock kind of thing, but it also has a folk kind of feeling, especially with his deeper vocal register. Kind of almost make me think of like a modern Leonard Cohen. But like I said, that's how music usually is for me, with liking what grows on me more. And back to Clair Obscur, I'm sure it will continue to grow on me, as its story is one of the best stories told, not just in video games, but honestly, in general. But the overall experience is where Death Stranding 2 excels, at least for me personally. But I still hope Expedition 33 wins Game of the Year, because it will make the vast impact it already has on the gaming culture even bigger and last even longer, and I feel in the history books, it will always be the game that's most talked about from this year. So that's it for my thoughts on the games up for Game of the Year, whether they be family games to share with your family over the course of the years, tales of old with completely different styles of pacing, or two juxtaposing explorations of grief. These are the top games of the year, but I do have an honorable mention I'm also working on a video for. But let me know what you think, and if there's any other interesting comparisons I've missed with these, or if you could think of previous year that had a similar vibe to this in the past. I'd love to see your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching, and have a good one, and I'll see you on the tube side.